There's a man in Portland named David. He drives a 2009 Honda CR-V with a small dent above the rear wheel well that he never bothered to fix. He wears clothes from thrift stores, not because he can't afford otherwise, but because he genuinely doesn't care. He wakes up every morning without an alarm. He walks his dog for 45 minutes, makes his own coffee, and then sits down to work. Not for a boss, not for a corporation, but on a small digital business he built over 3 years that now earns him roughly $11,000 a month on autopilot. Nobody at the local grocery store suspects it. His neighbors think he's between jobs. His old college friends, the ones still grinding 60-hour weeks in Manhattan and San Francisco, feel vaguely sorry for him when he doesn't show up to the reunion wearing the right watch. David is not struggling. David has won. But no one can see it. And here's the fascinating part. He doesn't want them to. This is the story of a new kind of wealth. Not the kind that announces itself with the leased BMW and a LinkedIn post about scaling to 7 figures. Not the kind that needs an audience. This is the quiet, invisible, almost rebellious kind of freedom that a growing number of people are building, deliberately, patiently, outside the sightlines of a society that only respects wealth it can measure with its eyes. And the deeper you look at this phenomenon, the more it reveals something uncomfortable about all of us, about why we work so hard, for whom we're really working, and what we've been taught to confuse for success. Let's start with the rat race itself, because I think most people use that phrase without really feeling the weight of what it describes. The term comes from the idea of a rat running endlessly on a wheel, expending enormous energy, going nowhere. And when sociologist C. White Mills began applying it to modern American work culture in the 1950s, he was pointing at something that has only intensified since then. The rat race isn't just about working too much, it's about working for a system of rewards that are fundamentally social in nature. You're not just chasing money, you're chasing recognition. You're chasing the feeling of being seen as successful by people who are also chasing that same feeling from you. It's a closed loop, a feedback system with no exit built into the design. The psychologist Abraham Maslow would have recognized it immediately. Human beings, after their basic needs are met, are extraordinarily motivated by esteem, both self-esteem and the esteem of others. But what the modern economy figured out, somewhere around the mid-20th century, is that you can monetize that need. You can sell people a Mercedes-Benz not as transportation, but as proof. Proof that they matter, proof that they've arrived. And if you can make people believe that proof requires constant renewal, a newer model, a bigger house, a more impressive title, then you've created a market that never saturates. The rat race is, at its core, a status game, and status games are exhausting precisely because they have no finish line. So, what does it actually look like to escape? Most people imagine escaping the rat race as a dramatic rupture. They picture someone quitting their job in a blaze of glory, moving to Bali, posting aesthetic photos of coconuts and open laptops on Instagram, and building a personal brand around their freedom. And some people do exactly that. But that version of escape is interesting to me for one specific reason. It's still performing. It has traded one audience for another. It has replaced the status markers of corporate life, the corner office, the title, the salary, with the status markers of the freedom economy, the follower count, the passive income screenshot, the lifestyle brand. Real escape, it turns out, looks almost nothing like what we've been shown. It looks like David in Portland with his dented Honda. It looks like Karen, a former marketing executive in Chicago who left her $80,000 a year job in 2019 to start a boutique consulting practice from her kitchen table. She now works roughly 20 hours a week, earns slightly less than she did before, but owns every hour of her day. She goes to her kids' school plays. She reads books in the afternoon. She has no social media presence. When old colleagues ask what she's up to now, she says freelance consulting with a vague smile, and they nod politely, internally adjusting her status downward without realizing they're doing it. It looks like Marcus in Austin, A software engineer in Austin who reached a savings rate of 70% for 6 consecutive years, invested quietly into index funds, paid off his modest house, and retired at 39 to spend his time learning woodworking and teaching free coding classes at a community center. His car is 12 years old. His vacations are camping trips in national parks. By every visible metric, he looks like someone who is barely getting by. By every actual metric, he is more financially free than 97% of the people who would pity him at a glance. The invisibility of their wealth is not accidental. It is the product of a deliberate decoupling, a conscious choice to stop letting consumption be the language through which they communicate their value to the world. Here is where it gets psychologically interesting. There's a concept in social psychology called consumption anomalies, a term coined by economist Thorsten Wiebel in 1909, who observed that the wealthy didn't just spend money, they spent it publicly and wastefully, specifically to signal their status to others. The more useless the expenditure, the stronger the signal. A diamond that serves no function beyond beauty, a watch that costs more than a car, a penthouse with more rooms than you'll ever use. These aren't purchases, they're broadcasts. The psychologist Abraham Maslow would have recognized it immediately. Human beings, after their basic needs are met, are extraordinarily motivated by esteem, both self-esteem and the esteem of others. But what the modern economy figured out somewhere around the mid-20th century is that you can monetize that need. You can sell people a Mercedes-Benz not as transportation, but as proof. Proof that they matter, proof that they've arrived. And if you can make people believe that proof requires constant renewal, a newer model, a bigger house, a more impressive title, then you've created a market that never saturates. The rat race is, at its core, a status game. And status games are projections of what a meaningful life looks like. And status games are precisely exhausting because they have no finish line. So what does it actually look like to escape? Most people imagine escaping the rat race as a dramatic rupture. They picture someone quitting their job in a blaze of glory, moving to Bali, posting aesthetic photos of coconuts and open laptops on Instagram, and building a personal brand around their freedom. And some people do exactly that. But that version of escape is interesting to me for one specific reason. It's still performing. It has traded one audience for another. It has replaced the status markers of corporate life, the corner office, the title, the salary, with the status markers of the freedom economy, the follower count, the passive income screenshot, the lifestyle brand. What Wiebel noticed at the turn of the 20th century, behavioral economists have since confirmed in laboratory after laboratory. Human beings are profoundly social creatures who calibrate their sense of self-worth in relation to others. We aren't just trying to have things, we're trying to have things that other people can see us having. Take away the audience, and the desire often collapses. This is why lottery winners who buy enormous houses and luxury cars so frequently report being less happy 2 years after their windfall than they were before it. The purchase felt meaningful in anticipation, but once the neighbors adjusted, once the new car became the baseline, the social lift evaporated. And because they'd structured their identity around being seen as wealthy rather than around being free, they found themselves trapped again, just in a more expensive cage. The people who truly escape understand something that most of us intellectually know but emotionally resist. The validation never fills the hole. It can't, because the hole isn't shaped like validation. It's shaped like autonomy, like purpose, like time, like the freedom to move through your day according to your own design rather than someone else's expectations. When you stop performing wealth, something unexpected happens. You stop needing to earn it so desperately. The engine of compulsive accumulation quiets down, and in that quiet, you find out what you actually want. But let's be honest about the harder part of this story. Escaping the rat race is not just financially difficult, it is socially dangerous. And I mean that in a very specific, very human way. We are wired for belonging. For hundreds of thousands of years, being excluded from the group meant death. The ostracism reflex runs deeper than any conscious philosophy. And the rat race, for all its miseries, provides membership. It gives you a tribe, a vocabulary, a shared set of complaints and aspirations that function as social glue. When you opt out, you don't just lose a job, you lose a language, you lose a context in which your efforts are legible to the people around you.
This is why so many people who intellectually want to escape can't. It's not the money, it's the meaning. Or rather, it's the borrowed meaning that the system provides in place of the real thing. Think about how we introduce ourselves at parties. We say, "I'm a doctor," or "I'm in finance," or "I work at Google." We locate our identity in our productivity, in our market function. Ask someone who has voluntarily stepped back from all of that who they are, and there's often a long, uncomfortable pause. Because without the credential, without the company, without the title, they have to answer from somewhere much more honest. And that honesty is terrifying before it becomes liberating. David, the man from Portland, told a friend once that the hardest year wasn't the year he built his business, it was the year before it became profitable. When he had left his corporate job but hadn't yet created anything that people recognized as worthy of respect. That year of uncertainty, of invisibility, of fielding subtle condescension from people who were just worried about him. He described it as the loneliest of his adult life. He also described it as the most important. There is a particular kind of growth that only happens in the absence of external validation. Psychologists call it intrinsic motivation, doing something because the thing itself is meaningful, not because of the reward it brings from outside. And research going back to the 1970s from pioneers like Edward Deci and Richard Ryan has consistently shown that intrinsic motivation produces not just greater satisfaction, but greater creativity, greater persistence, and crucially, greater actual competence. When you stop performing for an audience, you stop optimizing for what looks good. You start optimizing for what works, for what you genuinely believe, for what you actually care about. And that shift, quiet as it is where real capability gets built. This is why so many people who escape the rat race and disappear from the visible success metrics eventually emerge, years later, having done extraordinary things, not in spite of their obscurity, but because of it. No one was watching, so they could fail freely, they could experiment, they could build something true. There is also something worth saying about money itself, about what it actually is when you strip the performance away from it. Most people in the rat race are accumulating money in order to spend it on things that signal their success to others. The money is a medium. It moves almost immediately from income to consumption to status display. There's very little of it that actually converts to freedom, because freedom requires a different relationship with money entirely. Freedom requires not spending it, or at minimum, spending it only on things that genuinely expand your time and autonomy rather than your social footprint. The quietly wealthy understand that money has two modes. In consumption mode, it performs. It disappears into objects and experiences that impress, and it has to be constantly replenished. In asset mode, it reproduces. It sits in index funds, in cash-flowing rental properties, in small businesses and dividend-paying stocks, and it generates more of itself while you sleep. The magic isn't in earning more, it's in making less of what you earn disappear into the performance. This is the core of what financial writers like Morgan Housel mean when they say that wealth is what you don't see. You cannot look at someone's car and determine their net worth. You cannot look at their house and know whether it's mortgaged to the hilt or paid off. The most important financial facts about a person are systematically invisible to the casual observer. And the people who have figured this out, who have stopped broadcasting and started building, are doing something that is genuinely structurally invisible to the culture around them. They are winning a game that most people don't even know is being played.
So, where does this leave the rest of us? Those of us still somewhere on the wheel, still running, still half convinced that the next raise or the next title or the next upgrade will be the one that finally makes it feel worth it. I think it leaves us with a question that is deceptively simple and almost impossible to answer honestly in the middle of ordinary life. Whose approval are you actually working for? Not in theory, not philosophically. Right now, in your actual choices about money and time and effort, whose face comes to mind when you imagine succeeding? Is it yours? Is it your parents'? Is it the colleagues you compete with without admitting it to? Is it an abstract, imaginary audience assembled from years of social conditioning about what a good life is supposed to look like? Because here's the thing nobody tells you at the beginning of the race. The crowd at the finish line is made up of people who are also running. They will cheer for you for exactly as long as your success makes them feel comfortable, and then they will quietly adjust their expectations upward and resume running. There is no moment of collective recognition that redeems all the years of grinding. The validation you're chasing is a moving target, and the people holding it are always one step ahead. The ones who figured this out, David, Karen, and Marcus, and the thousands of people living versions of their lives in ordinary houses in ordinary cities, didn't stop caring about success. They just stopped outsourcing the definition of it. They decided quietly and irrevocably that the only audience worth performing for was themselves. And then they stopped performing at all. They started building. They started living. They got off the wheel not with a dramatic announcement, but with a series of small, deliberate, almost invisible choices that compounded over time into something the people around them couldn't name and therefore couldn't see. Nobody noticed their wealth. And that is, in the end, precisely the point. Because the wealth they built was never meant to be noticed. It wasn't a performance seeking an audience. It was a foundation seeking a life. And on that foundation, quiet, unhurried, and unapologetically their own, they built the one thing that no salary, no title, and no luxury purchase has ever been able to buy. The freedom to be exactly where they are, exactly who they are, with absolutely no one to impress. That is what escaping the rat race actually looks like. Not a yacht, not a viral post, not a course on how you did it. Just a Tuesday morning, a cup of coffee, and a day that belongs entirely to you.